The laughter in the studio was already loud, but it had a hollow, manufactured ring to it, the kind of noise generated by the applause sign rather than genuine amusement. Jason Momoa sat in the guest chair, his massive frame practically swallowing the furniture, one leather-booted foot tapping a restless rhythm against the floor. Jimmy Kimmel leaned over the desk, his signature smirk fixed in place, holding a coffee mug with both hands as if it were a shield. They were only 3 minutes into the segment, but the air between them was already vibrating with a frequency that set teeth on edge. "I mean, look at you," Jimmy said, gesturing vaguely at Jason's chest, which was draped in a sheer, distressed linen shirt that revealed more tattoos than it covered. Did the rest of the shirt get caught in a shredder on the way here? Or is this what they're wearing in Atlantis these days? The audience chuckled, a obedient ripple of sound. Jason didn't smile. He shifted his weight, the leather of the chair creaking loudly in the sudden dip of silence that followed the laugh. He ran a hand through his hair, flipping the heavy mane back over his shoulder with a slow, deliberate movement that felt less like grooming and more like a predator clearing its vision. "It's comfortable, Jimmy," Jason said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the water in the mugs on the desk. "It's hot under these lights. You should try loosening a tie once in a while. Might help with the circulation." "Oh, I get plenty of circulation," Jimmy shot back, barely letting Jason finish. "I just prefer to keep my nipples a mystery to the viewing public." "It's called mystery, Jason. You give it all away for free." There it was, the second jab in under 60 seconds. The audience laughed again, louder this time, spurred on by the band leader playing a quick rim shot. Jason's jaw tightened, a small muscle feathered beneath his beard, ticking once, twice. He picked up his own mug, looked into it as if checking for something deeper than liquid, and set it back down with a thud that was slightly too heavy for live television. "I'm just here to talk about the movie, man," Jason said, his tone casual but the smile not reaching his eyes. "We worked hard on it. It's a good story." "Right, the movie," Jimmy said, flipping a cue card with a theatrical snap of his wrist. "Let's talk about Dune Drifter, or whatever this one is called. I saw the trailer. Lots of sand, lots of yelling, and surprise, surprise, lots of you holding heavy things and looking at the horizon like you forgot where you parked your car." The audience roared. It was a classic Kimmel roast setup. Diminish the work, elevate the host's wit. Usually the guest played along. Usually the guest would laugh, make a self-deprecating joke, and the clip would end up on YouTube with a title like "Jason Momoa Roasts Jimmy Kimmel." But Jason wasn't playing. He sat perfectly still, his size suddenly feeling less like a characteristic and more like a threat. "It's a drama, Jimmy," Jason said softly. The audience quieted down, sensing the shift. "It's about isolation. It's about a man losing his family." "Well, sure," Jimmy interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "But let's be honest. Nobody buys a ticket to see Jason Momoa emote about his feelings. They buy a ticket to see you punch a sandworm or throw a tank at a building. You're the heavy lifter. You're the muscle. Leave the crying to the guys who can fit into a medium t-shirt." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The band stopped their idle noodling. The camera operators froze, sensing the framing needed to tighten. Jason turned his head slowly, locking eyes with Jimmy. The playful glint that usually resided in the actor's gaze was gone, replaced by a flat, obsidian hardness. "You think that's all I do?" Jason asked. It wasn't a shout, it was barely a whisper, but the microphone picked up the gravel in his throat. Jimmy blinked. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. A seasoned host knows when the ice is thinning, but Jimmy's instinct was always to skate faster rather than retreat. He leaned forward, doubling down on the premise, banking on the audience's desire for comedy to bridge the gap. "I'm just saying, looking at the resume," Jimmy said, his voice taking on that pitchy, defensive tone he used when cornered. "You've got Conan, Aquaman, Game of Thrones. There's a pattern, Jason. You don't exactly see you lining up for Shakespeare in the park. Unless the park is on fire and you're fighting a dragon in it." A few people in the back laughed, but it was nervous, scattered. The tension in the studio was thick enough to choke on. Jason leaned forward, placing his elbows on the desk. The distance between his face and Jimmy's shrank to uncomfortable inches. I studied the craft for 20 years, Jason said, his voice deliberate, spacing the words out like he was laying bricks. I write, I direct, I produce. Just because I'm big doesn't mean I'm a prop. I didn't call you a prop, Jimmy said quickly, holding up a hand. I called you a specialist. There's a difference. Is there? Jason asked. Because it feels like you're trying to tell these people that what I do is a joke. I'm a comedian, Jason, Jimmy said, his smile tight, his eyes darting to the floor director for a time check. Everything is a joke to me. That's the gig. You come here, we have a laugh, you sell some tickets. Don't get all serious on me now. It kills the vibe. Maybe the vibe needs killing, Jason murmured. The producer in the control booth hissed into the headsets. Stay on them. Do not cut away. This is gold. But on the floor, it didn't feel like gold. It felt like a beam ticking down in a room with no windows. Jimmy cleared his throat, shifting tactics. He needed a reset. He reached under the desk, pulling out a large, oddly shaped object covered in a velvet cloth. This was the plan bit, the fun segment. Okay, look, Jimmy said, his voice brightening artificially. Let's lighten the mood. We prepared a little something for you. We know you're the strong guy, the tough guy, despite your newfound love for Shakespeare. He whipped the cloth away to reveal a vintage carnival strength tester, one of those grip machines where you squeeze two metal handles to ring a bell. But this one had been modified. Instead of numbers, the levels were labeled with insults. Toddler, wimp, accountant, talk show host, and at the very top, Momoa. We call this the Momo meter, Jimmy announced, looking for the applause. The audience gave it to him, relieved to have a visual gag to break the staring match. The record is held by a grip from our lighting department. I want to see if the king of Atlantis can beat the guy who changes our light bulbs. He slid the heavy metal device across the desk toward Jason. It made a harsh scraping sound against the polished wood. Jason stared at the machine. He didn't move his hands. He looked at the device, then up at Jimmy, then out at the audience, who were waiting with bated breath for the feat of strength. Go on, Jimmy urged, gesturing. Give it a squeeze. Show us that raw power, unless you're worried you'll ruin the manicure. It was a throwaway line, a standard late-night jab at a celebrity's vanity. But in the context of the last 5 minutes, it landed like a slap. Jason's eyes narrowed. He looked at the machine like it was a dead rat. No, Jason said. Jimmy froze. The smile faltered, twitching at the corners. What do you mean, no? It's a bit. It's fun. The people want to see it. I'm not a circus bear, Jimmy, Jason said, leaning back in his chair, crossing his massive arms over his chest. I'm not here to perform tricks for you. I'm not here to squeeze things or break things or take my shirt off so you can make a gif out of it. It's a talk show, Jimmy snapped, the mask slipping further. Performing is literally what you are paid to do. You're an entertainer. Entertain. I entertain by telling stories, Jason countered, his voice rising in volume for the first time. Not by flexing on command because the host is too lazy to conduct a real interview. The audience gasped. The ooh sound rippled through the stands, unbidden. This wasn't banter. This was a direct attack on Jimmy's professionalism. Jimmy sat up straighter, his ego bruising in real time. Lazy? Jimmy repeated, his voice dropping an octave, shedding the comedic lilt. I'm lazy. I'm here every night, Jason. I do the monologue, I do the sketches, I carry this show. You show up for 8 minutes, plug a movie where you say 3 lines and grunt the rest, and you're calling me lazy? I'm calling you shallow, Jason said, the words cutting through the air like a knife. I'm sitting right here, a human being, and you haven't asked me a single real question. It's all just noise. It's all just you trying to make yourself look big by making me look stupid. I don't have to try very hard, Jimmy muttered. It was quiet, too quiet. The audience didn't know how to react to that one. It was mean, it was petty. It was the kind of thing you say in a bar fight not on ABC at 11:35 p.m. Jason slowly uncrossed his arms. He placed his hands flat on the desk. His rings clicked against the surface. He looked at Jimmy with a mixture of pity and disgust. You know, Jason said, his voice remarkably calm, my team told me not to do this show. They said you were burned out. They said you'd stopped caring about the guests years ago. Jimmy bristled, his face flushing a blotchy red. Your team? You mean the entourage of yes men who carry your protein shakes? I'm sure their opinions are fascinating. They were right, Jason continued, ignoring the interruption. You're not listening, Jimmy. You're just waiting for your turn to speak. You're waiting for the punchline. You don't see the person across from you. I see a guy who can't take a joke, Jimmy shot back, pointing a finger. I see a guy who got famous because he looks good in a loincloth and now thinks he's Daniel Day-Lewis. You're an action star, Jason. Own it. Stop pretending you're burdened by your own biceps. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing? Jason stood up. The movement was sudden and massive. When Jason Momoa stands up in anger, he unfolds like a collapsing building in reverse. He towered over the desk, blocking out the studio lights, casting a long shadow over Jimmy. Jimmy leaned back instinctively, his chair rolling a few inches away from the desk. You want to see embarrassing? Jason asked, looking down at the host. Embarrassing is a grown man who needs to humiliate people to feel tall. Jason reached out. Jimmy flinched, actually throwing his hands up as if to ward off a blow. The audience screamed, a short, sharp shock of sound. But Jason didn't strike him. Jason reached for the strength tester. He picked it up with one hand, his grip encompassing the entire mechanism. He didn't squeeze it. He didn't look at the dial. He simply held it up, inspecting it like a piece of trash found on the sidewalk. You want me to break this? Jason asked softly. Is that what would make you happy? If I crushed your little toy? Put it down, Jason, Jimmy said, his voice trembling slightly. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry cough. Okay, we get it. You're intense. Great bit. We can cut to a commercial. I don't think so, Jason said. He looked directly into camera one. He broke the fourth wall, staring straight into the living rooms of millions of Americans. This is what they think of you, Jason said to the camera, gesturing vaguely at the set, the desk, the host. They think you're simple. They think you just want the noise. But I know you're smarter than that. I know you want the real story. He turned back to Jimmy. He set the machine down. He didn't slam it. He placed it gently, delicately, right in the center of the desk, directly over Jimmy's notes. I'm not going to break your toy, Jimmy, Jason said, and I'm not going to fix your ratings. Jason, come on, Jimmy pleaded, seeing the segment dissolving into a PR disaster. Sit down, let's reset. We'll talk about the directing. We'll talk about whatever you want. It's too late, Jason said. The vibe is dead. He turned and began to walk away, not toward the backstage curtain where the guests usually exited, but toward the audience stairs. He walked to the edge of the stage, paused, and looked at the crowd. They were silent, staring up at him with wide eyes. Sorry about the show, Jason said to the front row. Go see the movie. Or don't. But don't let anyone tell you who you are. He hopped off the stage, bypassing the security guards who had started to move forward. He walked up the aisle through the crowd, shaking a few hands as he went, moving with a long, purposeful stride. The cameras scrambled to follow him, the operators swinging their heavy rigs around, catching the back of his head, the sheer shirt, the bewildered faces of the audience members he passed. On stage, Jimmy Kimmel was alone. He sat behind his desk, the velvet cloth of the failed prop crumpled in his hand. The band leader looked at him, waiting for a cue. The producers were screaming in his earpiece, throw to break, throw to break. But Jimmy seemed frozen. He looked at the empty chair where Jason had been sitting. He looked at the Momo meter sitting on his notes. He looked small. For the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel didn't have a comeback. He didn't have a quip. He tapped his pen against the desk, a nervous staccato rhythm that echoed in the silent studio. Well, Jimmy said finally, his voice sounding thin and tinny in the cavernous room. That was Jason Momoa, everybody. There was no applause, just a low murmur of confusion and the sound of a door slamming somewhere at the back of the auditorium. Jimmy forced a smile, but it was a gruesome thing, devoid of humor. He looked at the camera, his eyes pleading for the red light to go off. We'll be right back, he said. The screen didn't fade to black immediately. It lingered for a cruel extra 3 seconds, capturing the moment Jimmy Kimmel slumped in his chair, exhaling a breath that looked painfully like defeat. before the network finally cut the feed and the commercial for a cheerful laundry detergent took over. The YouTube video of the incident didn't have a clickbait title. It didn't need one. It was simply titled, "Jason Momoa Walks Out." Within 4 hours, it had 6 million views. The comments section was a war zone. The internet, usually so divided, found itself fracturing into two distinct, violent camps. User 7734 writes, "Jimmy got what he deserved. You can see the exact moment where he broke Jason's patience." The specialist comment was disgusting. "Jason is an artist, not a side of beef." Laugh Factory fan writes, "Momoa has no chill. It's a comedy show. You go on Kimmel to get roasted. If you can't handle a joke about your shirt, stay home. He looked like a bully standing over the desk like that." Cinema Truth writes, "This wasn't about the shirt. Watch Jason's eyes at 2:14. He was trying to have a real conversation about his craft, and Jimmy wouldn't let him. It's a tragedy of modern media. We refuse to let action stars have souls." The debate raged on Twitter, on Reddit, on TikTok. Body language experts broke down the microaggressions in Jimmy's posture. Lip readers tried to decipher what Jason whispered to the security guard on his way out. But back in the studio, long after the audience had filed out, the tension remained. The lights were dimmed, the cleaning crew was sweeping up the confetti from the opening monologue, but the air still felt heavy. Jimmy sat in his dressing room, the makeup removed, his face pale in the vanity mirror. His producer, a frantic man named Gary with a perpetually unraveled tie, paced behind him. "We can edit it for the West Coast feed," Gary said, scrolling through his phone. "We can cut the lazy comment. We can make the walkout look like a skit. We can add a sound effect, make it seem planned." Jimmy stared at his reflection. He saw the lines around his eyes. He saw the gray in his beard. He saw the face of a man who had made a living poking bears until he finally found one that swiped back. "No," Jimmy said quietly. "No." Gary stopped pacing. "Jimmy, if we air this raw, you look weak. You look like you lost control of your own show." "I did lose control, Gary," Jimmy said. He picked up a bottle of water. His hand is shaking just slightly. "If we edit it, we look like cowards. If we air it, we look like human beings having a bad night." "It's going to be a disaster," Gary warned. "The publicists are already emailing. Momoa's team is threatening to pull his clips from the network." Jimmy spun his chair around. "Let them. Don't you get it? This is the most real thing that's happened on this show in 10 years. "Real isn't always good, Jimmy," Gary said softly. "It is tonight," Jimmy replied. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. He walked past the producer, out into the hallway lined with framed photos of smiling celebrities. Tom Cruise laughing, Jennifer Aniston hugging him, The Rock fake punching him. All curated moments, all safe. He stopped at the empty space on the wall where they usually hung the photo of that night's guest. It was blank, just a white rectangle of paint, waiting for a memory that would never be framed. Jimmy touched the wall. "He was right, you know," Jimmy whispered to the empty corridor. "About what?" Gary asked, following him out. "I haven't been listening," Jimmy said. "I've just been waiting to talk." He pushed open the heavy exit door, stepping out into the cool Los Angeles night. The paparazzi were already there, waiting by the gate, their flashbulbs popping in the darkness like strobe lights. They shouted his name, shouted questions about Jason, shouted for a reaction. "Jimmy, did he threaten you? Jimmy, is it a feud? Jimmy, give us a smile." Jimmy Kimmel stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at the blinding lights. He looked at the hungry faces of the photographers, men who made their living from friction and conflict, just like he did. He thought about the joke he had planned for tomorrow's monologue. He thought about the apology he might have to issue. He thought about the sheer, quiet dignity of Jason Momoa setting that strength tester down instead of smashing it. Jimmy didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply pulled his collar up against the chill, lowered his head, and walked toward his car, leaving the questions unanswered. The cameras kept clicking, capturing the back of a man walking away from the noise he had helped create. And somewhere in the city, Jason Momoa was washing the makeup off his face, staring into a different mirror, wondering if proving a point was worth the silence that always followed. Neither of them won. The audience got their clip. The network got their ratings. But as the cars drove away into the sprawling, indifferent grid of Los Angeles, the only thing that remained was the uneasy feeling that something had broken that couldn't be fixed with a commercial break. The next night, the show would go on. The band would play. The applause sign would light up, but the chair would look a little different and the laughter, for a while at least, would be a little quieter. Because once you see the strings, you can never quite enjoy the puppet show the same way again. And tonight, Jason Momoa hadn't just cut the strings. He had burned the whole theater down, leaving everyone to sit in the ashes and wonder why they were clapping in the first place.